quilting friends, it's Carolina Moore here from alwaysexpectmore.com, and today I'm doing a much requested video, and that is how to free motion quilt a big quilt. I have this 72 by 72 inch quilt that I have pieced, and last night I basted it, and now I'm ready to quilt it, and I wanted to take you through that process to show you how you can absolutely free motion quilt a bigger quilt on your domestic. I do have two other videos that I want to point you to because this video is just on the mechanics of how to do this. It isn't on actual free motion quilting designs. So I do have two other videos on free motion quilting designs. One is crazy popular, and that is learn how to free motion quilt 5 different shapes with one easy motion, and I have that link down below. And the other is a sequel to that showing you even more simple free motion quilting shapes that you can make. On this quilt, I think I'm going to do mostly just swirls. I might, for giggles, throw some other fun little designs in there just to add a little bit of interest, but mostly it's going to be just all over swirls, pretty simple, because I do want to get this one done. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the steps on how to do this. Okay, I have my Baby Lock Aria all set up. Her name is Sunday. I have a Baby Lock Jubilant named Saturday, and that way I say that I only quilt on Saturday and Sunday. And I already have some thread in the bobbin, and this is going to be the thread that's on the back of the quilt. So I just went with this Madeira Katona gray, which is just beautiful. And then I wanted to pick a thread for the top, and I'm gonna go with this variegated gray, which I think is going to look really neat. It's going to have some great quilting accents without dominating the quilt. So we want to thread the machine. I have my machine all threaded, and I just have a standard foot on here, and I'm actually just going to take it off. So there are, on any machine, 2 screws. One screw is to hold the needle in place, and that's the needle bar, and the other is the screw to hold the foot in place. And I'm going to add a free motion quilting foot. An embroidery foot also works great. There are all different kinds of feet that have some kind of either open toe or loop right here for free motion quilting. Now I'm going to change, and on this machine I have the option to set it to free motion quilting. If you don't have that option, you want to take your feed dogs, and somewhere here on the bottom on most machines is an option to lower your feed dogs. Because with free motion quilting, we're the ones moving the fabric around. We don't want the machine trying to move the fabric around with those feed dogs. Also, this is my super slider. I will link to this down below as well. And this just makes it a little smoother to slide my quilt around, and I want to have that hole over the bottom. Now you can see at one point I ripped this, not a big deal. You do want to be wary that sometimes if they're not sticky enough, they will kind of lift up and move with your quilt as you're moving your quilt, and you end up stitching it to the back of your quilt. That's not awesome. So if you're worried about that happening, you definitely want to rewash it. And you can always tape down the edges with just some masking tape to secure it. I'm not worried about this at this point though. I think it's going to be fine. So we have bobbin threaded, needle threaded, we have the feed dogs down, we have our super slider in place. I think we're ready to start quilting. A good thing to do at this step is to go ahead and use a practice sandwich and practice on a practice sandwich for a little bit, just so that you can get that hum purr down of your machine. But that is up to you. If you feel like you're ready to dive in, just go ahead and dive in. Okay, so when we are quilting a big quilt like this, there are 3 things that we want to remember. 1 is gravity, 2 is friction, and the 3rd is snag. And those are the forces that you're going to be fighting against when you quilt your quilt. And if you can figure out how to be friends with those forces, then you don't have to fight them, and quilting your big quilt will be so much easier. So gravity is, if I start putting this quilt underneath the machine, under my needle, and I want to start towards the middle. What gravity is going to do is I now have some of this quilt on my lap and hanging off the front of the table. And that creates a problem because as I'm going to try to move this quilt, I've got all this weight of the gravity of the quilt in my lap that I have to pull against. Same with off the side edges of my table. Even though I have a pretty big table, it's those side edges. Also, it's the friction of trying to pull a lot of quilt over a lot of surface area. Gravity's pulling this quilt down onto my tabletop, and trying to pull all of that quilt is going to really give me a lot of muscles in a really short time, which makes you sore when you try to build too many muscles in too short of time. So what you want to do is you want to lift up as much as your quilt as possible. And what you do is you actually kind of create yourself a nest. And that way, if you see, when I move, I'm really just moving this part because I'm not trying to drag the whole quilt and move the whole quilt. I'm just worried about this part of my nest. And then when I get somewhere else, I'll just create myself a new nest. And then I'll stitch in that part. And then I can always create a new nest and then stitch in that part. I hope that makes sense as I've described it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and quilt it so you can see how that's done. I always do needle down, needle up, and that pulls my bottom thread up. If you don't do that, you'll end up with this bottom thread kind of creating a tangle on the back of your quilt, and that's always ugly. And if you do it this way, then you have the option to tie off your threads and bury them, which is what I like to do. Or if you're in a hurry, you can always just clip them flush to the quilt. It's up to you. I'm going to do my presser foot down and finding my foot pedal. I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. Now I'm already starting to feel some drag, and sure enough, I have this front corner has been tucked up, or tucked down, I guess, under there. And I also tend to quilt a little weird. I like to have one hand under my quilt while I quilt. So I have one hand on top and one hand under. No one taught me that this was a best practice. It's just something that I started doing. Okay, once you get to a part where it's not easy to move your pieces around or move your quilt around, you just create yourself a new kind of flat spot going in the direction that you want to go. So I'm kind of wanting to go in this area. All right, I'm starting to get a groove on this. It's time to either put in a podcast or a good audiobook and just start stitching away. I'm going to speed this up and give you a little bit of music if you want to watch along. But if you don't, you just want to stop here, I'm totally good with that. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I have so much fun quilting goodness still coming for you, and if you subscribe and hit that bell, you'll be the first to know when I have a new video out. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the quilting.